The Social Security benefit statement in front of a 63-year-old, the letter the administration mails every year with the row of numbers by claiming age, looks like a menu with 4 items on it: 62, 63, 67, 70. The dollar amount to the right of each row is different. Of the 70 row is larger than the amount to the right of the 63 row by roughly 75%. The standard advice delivered by nearly every financial advisor, retirement article, and personal finance channel that has ever addressed this decision is to wait for the 70 row. Delayed retirement credits. Compound the higher benefit for life. Don't leave money on the table. The standard advice is wrong for a large fraction of the people receiving it. Not slightly wrong, mathematically wrong for their specific situation, in a way that leaves them worse off across the remainder of their working and retired life than an earlier claim would have. I want to walk through the 4 specific situations where filing at 63 is the mathematically correct choice, and to be clear about the arithmetic under each one. The industry has quietly built its default around a specific model of retiree: long-lived, healthy, portfolio modest, still able to work, that fits maybe 30% of the actual population approaching this decision. If you're in the other 70%, this video is for you. I want to tell you where I'm coming to this from, because it changes what I know and don't know about the decision. Over the last 2 years or so, I've watched 3 separate households work through this exact calculation, and I've read most of what Kotlikoff and his co-authors have written on it. I'm not an actuary. I'm not a certified financial planner. What I've done is watched the arithmetic get run in real time by people who were staring at their actual statement numbers. And I've watched what the standard advice looked like when it collided with the actual variables of their specific situation. The first of those 3 households, which I'll come back to at the end, was a couple in their early 60s, where the higher-earning spouse had been laid off in a corporate restructuring at 59. They spent 18 months trying to find equivalent work, and they didn't. They eventually filed at 63. Everything in the standard advice literature would have told them that was a mistake. When I ran their actual arithmetic, using the exact framework I'm about to walk you through, it wasn't a mistake at all. It was the mathematically correct answer for their specific situation, and it wasn't close. I bring this up because the standard advice is delivered as a universal, and it isn't. It's calibrated for a specific profile, and if you're not in that profile, which most people aren't, the arithmetic points somewhere else. That's the whole subject of what follows. The framework I'll be leaning on comes from a specific book. Lawrence Kotlikoff, an economist at Boston University who spent much of his career studying Social Security specifically, co-authored a book in 2015 with Philip Muller and Paul Salman titled Get What's Yours: The Secrets to Maxing Out Your Social Security, published by Simon & Schuster, revised in 2016 and again in 2020. Kotlikoff has been more direct than almost anyone else in the industry about the fact that the universal delay recommendation is wrong for most people, and he has written extensively on the specific situations where earlier claiming is optimal. What I'll walk you through here draws on his work, on the Social Security Administration's own public actuarial tables, and on the CDC and NCHS life expectancy data. I'm not an advisor, and this isn't advice. I'm walking you through arithmetic you can then run against your own numbers. Let's start with the break-even math, because it's the calculation almost nobody actually runs. The Social Security Administration's actuarial reduction schedule is public. For someone with a full retirement age of 67, which applies to anyone born in 1960 or later, the benefit at 63 is roughly 75% of the FRA amount. At 67, it's the full 100%. At 70, it's roughly 132% because the delayed retirement credits max out at 8% per year past FRA. Take a real example. Someone whose FRA benefit would be $2,000 a month. At 63, $1,500. At 67, $2,000. At 70, $2,640. Between 63 and 67, the person who claimed at 63 has already received $72,000, $1,500 a month times 48 months. After 67, the delayed claimant collects $500 a month more than the early claimant. To make up the $72,000 head start, the delayed claimant needs 144 months of the extra $500, 12 years. Break-even age is roughly 79. Between 63 and 70, the early claimant has received $126,000 by age 70. The delayed claimant then collects about $1,140 a month more. Break-even age is roughly 79 and a half, 19 more years past the 63 decision. That's the actual break-even. Now open the CDC life expectancy tables. A 63-year-old American male at the point of the decision has a life expectancy of roughly 19 more years, age 82. Female, roughly 22 more years, age 85. That's population average. No health adjustment, no lifestyle adjustment, no family history adjustment. If you expect to live to 82 as a male, waiting until 70 is a coin flip. If you have any chronic condition, cardiovascular, metabolic, respiratory, the break-even shifts against you by several years. If you have a family history of specific mortality patterns, further against you. This isn't a moral argument. This is the arithmetic the SSA itself publishes and the CDC itself publishes run together. Put a calculator next to you. Do the same math with your own statement numbers. It takes about 11 minutes. I want to name something about how this decision usually gets discussed because it matters. The break-even calculation I just walked you through, the actual apples-to-apples math with real numbers, almost never gets run inside advisor conversations. What gets shown instead is a chart of the cumulative lifetime benefit at each claiming age, assuming you live to a specific age, like 90. 90 is well past the population average life expectancy at 63, and the chart guarantees that delaying wins because it's been calibrated against a scenario in which almost nobody actually lives. If you ask to see the same chart calibrated against your actual life expectancy quartile, which the CDC publishes and which any competent actuary can produce in an afternoon, the shape flips for a large fraction of people. I've watched this specific conversation happen twice. Both times, the advisor was surprised, then thoughtful, then quiet. That's the honest version of the interaction. That's situation 1. Life expectancy at or below the break-even point. Situation 2. The spousal benefit. Under current Social Security rules, following the 2015 Bipartisan Budget Act that eliminated the old file and suspend strategy, a lower-earning spouse can claim a spousal benefit worth up to 50% of the higher earner's full retirement age benefit. But there's a catch. The higher earner has to have actually filed for the lower earner to be able to claim the spousal amount. Take a household. Higher earner would receive $2,400 at FRA. Lower earner has a modest work history. Their own benefit would be about $800. The spousal benefit on the higher earner's record would be $1,200, half of the higher earner's FRA. If the higher earner delays until 70, the household maximizes the higher earner's own eventual benefit. But the lower earning spouse cannot claim their spousal amount until the higher earner has filed. The lower earner is stuck at their own $800, or delays as well. If the higher earner files at 63, the spousal benefit becomes available. Household income jumps by roughly $400 a month. The difference between the lower earner's $800 solo and their $1,200 spousal, plus the higher earner's own reduced amount. For a couple where the spread between individual earnings histories is wide, one primary earner, one part-time or homemaker across the career, filing at 63 to unlock the spousal benefit can add roughly $15,000 to $20,000 a year to household cash flow that would otherwise not exist. Across a 20-year retirement, that's $300,000 to $400,000. Even factoring in the reduced primary benefit, the household number is usually higher. Nobody who tells you to wait until 70 runs this calculation for the household. Here's where the mechanism kicks in on the household level. If the primary earner is going to be the surviving spouse in 90% of statistical projections, actuarially unlikely but worth checking family patterns, then delaying may still make sense. But if the lower earning spouse is the statistically likely survivor, and they usually are, then the survivor benefit will step up to the higher earner's amount anyway. Filing early doesn't reduce the survivor benefit as dramatically as it might appear. It just brings forward the years when the household has more income to live on together, before the survivor benefit rule takes effect on one of them. That's situation 2. Household with a wide earnings spread and a locked spousal benefit. Situation 3. You already have a substantial invested portfolio. The sequence of returns risk in the first 5 to 7 years of retirement is one of the most well-documented risks in the retirement research literature and one of the most under-discussed at the individual claim decision. If a retiree draws down their portfolio during a bear market in the first years of retirement, the mathematical damage to the portfolio's long-term ability to sustain income is disproportionate, much larger than if the same bear market hit 10 years into retirement. The mechanism is simple. Money withdrawn during a down market can't recover when the market recovers. You've sold at the bottom to cover living expenses. The remaining portfolio is smaller than it would have been if you'd been able to leave it alone during those down years. This is why the first decade of retirement is called the fragility window. Social Security, taken at 63, gives you a floor of guaranteed income that lets the portfolio ride through those first critical years without drawdown pressure. Someone with $1 million portfolio and $18,000 a year in Social Security starting at 63 has a very different sequence risk profile than someone with the same portfolio and no Social Security until 70. Kotlikoff, in the book and in his subsequent writing, has been direct about this specific interaction. His summary, in my paraphrase, is that the delayed claim strategy quietly assumes the retiree is drawing from a portfolio that isn't exposed to sequence risk. If the portfolio is exposed to sequence risk, and most portfolios in the retirement phase are, unless they're in structured annuities or bond ladders, the early claim can serve as a hedge that lets the portfolio survive the first critical decade. For households in the top half of retirement account balances, this specific consideration flips the standard advice for a significant fraction of them. That's situation 3. Substantial portfolio exposed to sequence risk in the fragility window. I want to add one observation here that I keep running into and haven't seen discussed clearly in the mainstream personal finance literature. Most retirement projections use a smooth average return, 6 or 7%, applied uniformly each year. Actual market returns are not smooth. they arrive in a specific sequence, and the sequence matters more than the average when you're drawing income from the portfolio. A household that retires into a 3-year bear market with no Social Security cushion is drawing down principal at the worst possible time, and the portfolio may never recover the capacity it lost in those 3 years. That same household, retiring with an early Social Security claim covering 40 or 50% of monthly expenses, doesn't have to sell at the bottom. They ride the bear market with reduced withdrawals, and the portfolio recovers with them. The mathematical difference between those two scenarios, run out to age 85, is often larger than the entire delayed retirement credit differential the standard advice was defending. That's the piece of the argument that rarely makes it into the conversation. Brief stop. Net sum does something the other channels in this space skip. It shows the arithmetic between the choices, not just the choices themselves. The sequence risk math above, the spousal benefit math before it, the break-even math up top. If that's the tone you came for, subscribing here is the marker. That's the direction. The walk continues. Situation 4. You physically or structurally cannot keep working. This one is not about optimization, it's about intended use. The Social Security system was designed originally as a safety net for people who could no longer sustain themselves through work. The optimization framing, treating the claim decision as a math problem to solve for lifetime benefit maximization, is a relatively recent overlay by the financial industry. If you have been laid off in your early 60s and are running into age discrimination barriers in the hiring market, a well-documented pattern in the labor economics literature, you may not have the option to delay. If your body has broken down from physical work over a career, and the years between 63 and 67 are years you cannot productively work, you may not have the option to delay. If you're the primary caregiver for an aging parent or partner who requires your presence and your working time is materially reduced, you may not have the option to delay. In these situations, filing at 63 is not leaving money on the table. Filing at 63 is using Social Security exactly as it was designed to be used. And the optimization frame that tells you otherwise is a frame built on the assumption that you have the option to delay. If you don't, the frame doesn't apply to you. There's an entire literature on this that the standard advice rarely engages with. That's situation 4, loss of the ability to keep working through the delay window. Now, for the part that explains why the standard advice keeps pointing to 70 even when the math points elsewhere. The financial planning industry has a specific incentive structure that quietly nudges the advice in a particular direction. If you delay claiming Social Security, the money that would otherwise have come from the SSA has to come from somewhere else in the interim, most often from a portfolio the advisor is managing. A portfolio that continues to be managed produces continued advisory fees. A portfolio drawn down early to cover living expenses in the delay window produces the same fees temporarily, then no fees when it's exhausted. The advisor collects more over a longer horizon if the portfolio stays intact and the client waits for the higher SSA amount at 70. This isn't a conspiracy claim. Fees for assets under management are structural, and every advisor operating under an AUM fee model is quietly optimizing at the margin for portfolio preservation, regardless of whether it's optimal for the client. Kotlikoff has been direct about this, in interviews and in the book, describing the delay until 70 default as the piece of advice most likely to be independent of the client's actual situation. He would know. He co-wrote the book that made maximizing Social Security a household concept in 2015. and he explicitly argues that the maximization strategy depends entirely on individual circumstances, not on a universal delay recommendation. For roughly 30% of retirees, the specific population of long-lived, healthy, portfolio-modest, still employable individuals, the delay to 70 is the optimal call. For the other 70%, some combination of the four situations we've walked through applies, and 63 is often the mathematically correct answer. The default recommendation you receive is calibrated for the 30%. That's the whole story. Take the Social Security statement out. Look at the row for 63. If you have a substantially lower earning spouse whose spousal benefit is currently locked, 63 is often the right call. If you have a health condition or family history that reduces your expected lifespan below the population average, 63 is often the right call. If you have a substantial portfolio and want to reduce sequence risk in the fragility window, 63 is often the right call. If you have lost the ability or opportunity to continue working through the delay window, 63 is the right call, and it's the reason the program exists. If none of these apply, if you're the specific profile the delay recommendation was designed for, waiting until 70 is your best play. The answer is not universal. The math is. Ask yourself honestly which of the four situations you're actually in. Run the arithmetic with your specific statement numbers, not with the average. Kotlakoff's book, if you want the deeper treatment, is at any library. The SSA's calculator is on their website. The CDC tables are public. Everything you need to run this properly is free and available. Now, the couple I mentioned near the beginning. When I ran their arithmetic, 3 of the 4 situations applied to them simultaneously. The higher earner had been laid off at 59 and had spent 18 months in the wrong side of the age discrimination pattern in the hiring market. Situation 4. He had a substantial portfolio from 30-plus years of contributions, and they were staring into the fragility window of a possible market correction. Situation 3. And his wife had a substantially lower earnings history. Situation 2. Unlocked spousal benefit. Only Situation 1 didn't clearly apply. They were both in reasonable health at 63. But 3 out of 4 is more than enough. He filed at 63. She claimed her spousal benefit against his record. Their portfolio drawdown dropped from a projected 6% annual withdrawal to a manageable 3.5%. And the household number, projected out to age 85, is roughly $200,000 higher than it would have been if he'd delayed to 70 under the standard advice. Nobody in the industry ran that arithmetic for them. They ran it themselves. That's the whole point of this walkthrough. The industry has calibrated its default for the profile that fits about 30% of the population. If you're not in that profile, the default is wrong for you, and the arithmetic that would show you it's wrong is almost never presented. If any of the 4 named a situation you're actually in, drop the number in the comments. 1 for health, 2 for spousal, 3 for portfolio, 4 for work capacity, so other people in the same situation can find each other. Hit the like button if the math cleared something up, and subscribe to NetSum if you want the count to keep showing up. The count keeps counting.